Hey everybody, happy Tuesday. Yeah, it's Tuesday. Hope everybody's having a great week so far. A couple things I wanted to talk about today. Number one, there was a late breaking SCOTUS decision yesterday regarding the Trump executive order on mail in voting, and essentially forcing states to have to share their voter lists, so they can be checked across federal government records to make sure that all the people that are listed to vote are US citizens or are able to vote. Now, there's two kind of competing things here, right? Like, it is in the Constitution that states can determine or run their elections. This is true. And I do believe that states have the right to run their elections. But when you erode all of the checks and balances of your state run elections, the federal government has to step in. If we just look at the core of the problem here, which is illegals on voter rolls, I would say non-citizens on voter rolls, this is an actual problem. You have states that are giving the states that every state leverages their DMV as a place to register people to vote. And you have states that are giving sanctuary states, more specifically, almost all of them, I think actually all of them are Democrat run states, that give illegals, non-citizens, driver's licenses and ID cards. And in that process, it's the check of a box that automatically registers someone to vote as part of that process. Now, how do we know whether or not states are checking that to make sure that people that are on the illegal non-citizens that are getting IDs are not getting added to voter rolls? Well, there's really no way to check it. The states that implement these kind of policies, specifically in relation to non-citizens voting, do not want to share their voter rolls because it contains personal information of which the government doesn't already have, because you file your taxes every year. They are the originator of your social security number. They track where you live. They track how much money they literally have all the information, if not more information than some states. Although you do file your taxes at the state level as well, and they have all that similar information. But the core of the information, your passport information, your social security card, that stuff is all tracked by the federal government. So this whole argument around, well, we don't trust the government with this. They already have this. They want to compare it against what you have. But at any rate, this has all been validated regarding how they're able to catch, or the concerns around not catching and having illegals on your voter rolls. New Jersey is the perfect example of this. New Jersey just came out and said that a couple thousand individuals were registered to vote, 4,600 if I'm not mistaken, were registered to vote accidentally. And of those, 400 or so voted. And then within the state, there's multiple elections that were decided by less than 3 votes. And there's a ton of elections that were decided on less than 100 votes. And so when you start saying there's 400 people and it's not a big deal, it's not widespread voter fraud or this, that, and the other, like, it falls apart when you start to look at state, like local elections. And by the way, nothing that the federal government is doing is necessarily impacting how states want to run their state level elections, but it has more to do with federal elections. Although mail-in voting is used for state level elections and all that stuff, whatever. But the point is that because these states, at just the core level of providing driver's licenses and accidentally registering illegals to vote is an actual real thing, you need a way and a process to validate that. One is to be able to share the voter rolls. Two is, hey, the federal government controls the mail. And so if you want to have these things mailed out or passed around and have all this loose chain of custody, like the federal government wants to validate whether or not the ballot is going to a legitimate voter. I mean, those are the cards that are dealt. If Democrats hadn't have created sanctuary cities, given driver's licenses and IDs to illegal not citizens, illegal aliens, none of this would be an issue. It also wouldn't be an issue if you didn't have states like California and other states that essentially have legalized fraud, to the point where people are like, well, there's no fraud. Nobody's found any fraud in California. Well, because all of the fraud has been legalized. I mean, you can mass mail-in voting, not absentee voting, mass mail-in voting. So ballots are sent out to every person in the state. One person can be designated to collect as many ballots as necessary, which essentially creates electioneering. No chain of custody there. You don't need an ID to vote. You don't need an ID to register to vote. All of this stuff has just eroded the confidence in the elections in California, and this is happening in other states. And so if California wants to run this mass mail-in voting campaign, well, you got the people that are going to get the votes are going to be the ones that are legal US citizens. It's also going to be easy to see if an individual is registered across multiple states, because that is actually a thing. You'll be able to see whether or not dead citizens are on voter rolls and they need to get removed. All of these things add up. And while I don't necessarily agree with the federal government actively getting involved in state issues, this is one where I think the states have essentially trampled all of the credibility that they've had regarding the security of their elections. And so here we are. We'll see how this case ends up as it works its way through the court system. But as of right now, the states have to comply. They can't show harm because no harm has happened because the elections haven't taken place. And they can't do anything after the election has taken place because them's are the breaks, because it's exactly what the Trump team tried to do in 2020 when they were challenging the election, and all of the courts said they went in ahead of all of the elections and said, hey, these are the issues, and then they lacked standing because no harm had been done. And then after the election, they said, oh, well, you can't, you lack standing because you can't prove that that it was wide enough to actually affect the outcome of the election, which is absurd. But at any rate, here we are. We'll see how this case turns out. The other thing is this trade kind of battle that's going on between Canada and the US. Now, I don't think most people understand this, but the US is an importer. We export services. We export also some goods. Right now, we're exporting a lot of oil, natural gas, and whatnot. But we are an importer. We are the largest importer in the world. Every country that manufactures goods wants to be able to access the US market. So there's a couple things here, right? Like there's just the common sense that if you run a business and your business is, I would say, like the Amazon of the world, then you can dictate the terms because you have the customer base. So for the longest time, we've run this US business as in, hey, you know what? We know you guys are trying to compete with us, but we're just going to say, hey, free and fair trade. So while we didn't charge any tariffs on any goods that were getting exported from the US, every other country was. And they were doing it to protect their own markets, right? They didn't want to give up manufacturing or local production specifically of what their country does really well. You can see this with wine coming out of France or Italy. You can see cheese, same thing. You can see out of Canada, it's really wood, milk, cheese. It's things that they do really well, but they also want to be able to protect their jobs and ultimately their production capacity. What has happened is that the US has run itself like a not for profit. And so they've essentially said, hey, I know that you guys are charging tariffs on all the goods we're sending to your country, but it's absolutely okay that we don't charge you any tariffs on all of the stuff that's coming out of the US and going, or that's, yeah, it's coming out of the US and going to your countries. Um, that is the dumbest thing ever. Again, we are the ones that are importing a majority of the world's goods. We are essentially, the US is a buyer. And so without the US, all the other countries would fail, essentially. You could look at India and say, oh, they have like a billion people or whatever. Well, those billion people don't have the economic kind of standing that the average U.S. citizen does. We have a ton of money. We are like one of the richest countries in the world. As far as number of people and all that stuff, like, yes, I would say we are the wealthiest nation in the world. You could probably find another country that has significantly less people and technically is richer than the US, but we're the ones that are buying all the goods. And this is from people that make, sub 60K a year all the way through the upper echelon. And so there's that side of it, which is like, should free trade be an actual thing, especially when other countries are charging tariffs? And yeah, there can be an argument for like, yeah, well, they're only doing it on certain goods, not all goods, blah, blah. Doesn't matter. We should have the right to do it on every single product that comes into the US. And for this reason and this reason alone, every single product that we import is a product that's not created here in the United States. That means that is a job that is being lost to another country. You could see this in the 80s, 70s, 80s, 90s, as manufacturing just dropped off a cliff. So you had, you know, Ford and Dodge and Chrysler and all of these companies that were big dogs. But then as we started to allow other countries to manufacture those same goods, we stopped producing them in the US and all of those jobs dried up overnight. And those jobs are going to be very difficult to get back. So what do we need to do to make up for those job losses? We have to tariff those goods. It doesn't matter whether or not you're a U.S. based company. If you're if you're a U.S. based company and you send manufacturing overseas, if you're a foreign company and you're manufacturing and then importing those goods at a significant discount because your labor is cheaper and you're manipulating your currency, we probably need to level the playing field there. Just saying. If you're a US based company and you've made the decision to lay off American workers and shift those jobs overseas or to another country that borders ours, say Canada or Mexico, those goods deserve to be tariffed coming in. Like, there should be a incentive structure that drives local domestic production. That's it. That's it. And essentially, and this is why, like, before, Trump came in and was pushing all these tariffs, at first I was apprehensive. And then I was like, well, screw these other countries, right? Like, they've been screwing America for a long time, screwing America by essentially dumping cheap goods into the US and crushing the ability to manufacture them locally because we didn't put in tariffs. And then ultimately lowering the price of their labor, which created the situation that businesses were looking at manufacturing in the US versus manufacturing abroad. And those companies, looking at their bottom line, were like, yeah, this makes financial sense. We need to, shift labor out of the US. Don't get me wrong. I would do the same thing if I were in their shoes. I mean, generally speaking, I would try to figure out how I can maybe mitigate some of the losses for US labor, but it's a business at the end of the day. And these businesses have to make business decisions based on the facts in front of them. And had we at the time put tariffs on goods that were coming in and making it known to companies in the US, if you ship your jobs out of the US, we will punish you. Like had that happened then, we wouldn't have been in the situation that we are now. And we could have had protectionism where the price of a Honda Civic would have been very similar to the price of a Ford Focus, right? But instead, we allowed these companies, we allowed other countries to essentially manipulate the labor market and take these jobs from the US. And so now we're at a point where, like, I think, I think it's the reality that I live in is, do we need all of these cheap products from foreign countries? I would argue, no, we don't. Do we need $300 80-inch TVs? Like, no, we don't. If those 80-inch TVs were $1,000 or $2,000, one, you might respect it more and not want to throw it out after, a few years of use. It might also just generally be a better product. But do we need that cheap stuff? No. Do we need all these cheap tchotchkes that if you go to a conference, any conference, they're always putting on the tables? Like, do we need that stuff? Like, no. Like, no, we don't. Do we need, do we need any of, I mean, generally speaking, like, do we need most of the stuff in which comes from foreign countries? Not all of it. Now, I will say there's supply chains that even if we were to manufacture in the US, or a good is manufactured in the US, that a lot of this stuff comes from outside of the US from a parts perspective. I think that's something that needs to be solved. But do I think we need $300 cheap TVs? Do we need, very cheap laptops? Do we need like really cheap ovens and refrigerators and all this other stuff? Like, no, we don't. We just need quality products that will last a very long time. And if those products happen to cost more, so be it. And that's the way it was prior to this influx of all of these cheap Chinese, Korean, and Japanese goods. When they started flooding the market, it made things easier to get, don't get me wrong, and it made technology easier to get in the hands of people that were kind of lower on the economic chain. Are their lives generally better, overall better, because they have all these cheap products? I would argue no. That's just my take. But, again, you can let me know what you think. Do you agree that we shouldn't have tariffs and we should allow other countries to tariff our goods when they get exported? Do you think that other countries, it's good that they intentionally lower the cost of their labor to actively compete with US manufacturing so that US companies or other companies ship their labor and manufacturing to those countries? Let you decide on that one. The other thing that I just find the conversation around housing costs is ridiculous. And there's always this conversation of like, oh, well, the cost of housing in Tennessee is going down. The cost of housing in Texas is going down. It's because like their market's just going down and it's not doing well. That has nothing to do with it. I've heard this from Tim Pool. I've heard this from other people. The reason why the housing markets the prices are going down in these areas is because they are building a shit ton of housing. I cannot express this enough. I happen to live in one of those areas where housing is going up gangbusters. And so the more housing that is available on the market, new housing competing with existing homes, prices of housing goes down. That's it. It's also absolutely ridiculous to say like, oh, the housing market's going to collapse. Like, one, no, it's not. Because generally everybody's finances are tied up in their house and the value of their property, whether they have a mortgage or whether they've paid off their house. Their entire asset value, their value in general, is tied up in that asset. And so if you were to say like, oh, like, I'm just going to wait for housing to collapse, housing is never going to collapse. Mark my words, never going to collapse. You saw what happened in 2008, and that was before we put in all the controls that we have in now. There would be a bailout of mass proportions before there's a total housing collapse. And that is because those assets are propping up banks, they're propping up everything. And so if those assets collapsed, it would be detrimental to the economy, and it would be detrimental to the world economy. And so what you have are markets where prices are going down a little bit, especially in the rental market, because more houses are becoming available and online. And then you have prices dropping for new houses because there's a ton of supply coming online and it's exceeding the demand, which is what you want. But for people that live in places like Washington, D.C., Baltimore, Philadelphia, New York City, Boston, Detroit, like you could list any major city. Those places are never going to go down unless something catastrophic happens, like say a 9/11 again. Specifically, like in New York, housing prices dropped off. And even then, it was only for a short window of time. The real problem there is you cannot build anything new, and anything new that gets built is super expensive. And it's super expensive because of all the policies and regulations between rent controls, between building costs and land costs and having to buy air rights and doing all this other stuff. Like all of that adds up. And there's a finite amount of property. So the property is super expensive. The taxes on that property are super expensive. And so you have to divide that cost over the number of units that you're building. It's just cost prohibitive. And then people will say like, oh, in the case of New York City, like, oh, we'll build, housing further out in Queens and the Bronx and Brooklyn. Like nobody wants to live out there. It takes forever on public transportation to get in. Like you're talking about living, let's say 6 miles out from downtown Manhattan. That's like over an hour commute on the subway. Like that's a nightmare. And it's a fortune on taking cabs. So everybody wants to live Upper East Side, Upper West Side, down in Manhattan. They want to live along the waterfront in like Astoria, Queens, Long Island City, Greenpoint, Williamsburg, Brooklyn Heights, all along the water, because all of those places are easy to get into Manhattan, where all of the jobs are and where people work. And so like, it's just, I mean, maybe for like the average worker wants to live in the city, supply and demand problems are always going to be an issue, which is going to keep the price of housing extremely expensive for a very long time. I mean, the only thing that it would do is by producing housing further out is push the blue collar workers essentially further out, and they are the ones taking longer commutes while you have all the white collar workers living closer in the city and downtown. I mean, that's realistically it. I mean, that's how the city works. As the prices go up, it pushes the economies of scale. It's like the higher your income, the more you live to the center, where all the action happens, and the lower your income gets, the further out you live on the periphery and have to travel in to get access to those jobs and ultimately to the wealth of other individuals that are spending it, right? Whether you're a bartender, whether you're a waitress, whether you're a line cook, doesn't matter, or a bodega worker, doesn't matter. Like you're probably not living in the city, you're living further out. And as the costs go up in the center, they trickle out and push people to the periphery. But to the Tim Pools of the world, the reason why costs are going down in all of these places that are seeing a massive influx of people is because they're building housing. They also have the room to build housing, like a ton of undeveloped land. And so you have a bunch of people that are selling off their property. If it's not for houses, by the way, or to real estate developers for residential real estate. It's to commercial developers to build warehouses and to build data centers. If I owned a like 6 or 7 acres, I would be dying to sell it to a data center, by the way, because you'll get way more money than you will from a residential real estate developer. I also have zero problems with data centers, and I think that entire issue is manufactured and people have bought into it, especially since we've had data centers since the 90s and nobody has given a flying F about them, but all of a sudden cares. And all with all these artificial reasons. But at any rate, those are the things I kind of want to talk about. I mean, again, there's not a whole lot of news going on, but I mean, there is some stuff happening. We just sent CIA to Russia. Maybe that's to negotiate terms to the end of the war in Ukraine. We'll see. Nothing is really happening in Iran at all. I will say, for anybody tracking Rumble stock, you should. They just signed a pretty significant deal to provide compute infrastructure, a 6-year deal to provide compute infrastructure for, I think it was like 14 or $13 billion, somewhere around there. They're currently just over. Their currently market value is $3 billion. They're going to be pulling in significantly more than that with this deal. And even if this deal doesn't go to full term, they're bringing online a data center that's going to sell out of cloud compute one way or another, which is going to be somewhere in the neighborhood of just shy of $20 billion from that particular data center. You can look at their financials today and make the determination whether or not you want to invest in that company. This is not financial advice. Do your own research, all of that stuff. But I've watched Rumble stock skyrocket over the last 2 weeks, and it's mainly because people are starting to see like OS. They've moved into AI. They have this data center that's coming online. It's going to not only support their broader business, which is to compete with Google in the video space and the live streaming space, but also to provide compute and competes with CoreWeave and Nebius and SpaceX and all these other companies. And by the way, with all these companies coming out with compute infrastructure, there's still not enough to meet demand. And so every company that is opening a data center is going to quickly fill that data center. If you're smart, you're making investments in that direction. You're also doing the research to understand that all of the pushback on data centers is complete bunk. But hey, tell me why I'm wrong. I enjoy hearing it in the comment section below. And as always, keep believing that the best for America is still ahead. Peace out.